Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Taco Tuesday. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend. Yes, today is the 11th Taco Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout outs to Ichigo, Fatima, Mirasol, Rena for all joining us here early on Taco Tuesday. What are you guys drinking today? What you guys drinking? I got myself a really nice hot latte. It's by the way, it's my favorite drink of all time. It just is. Ooh, okay. So that was really good. What are you guys drinking? Just post in your room and see what you guys are drinking. All right, and anytime during this talk, just want to let everyone know, if you have any questions, just go ahead, write them right away, right? Anytime that you want to, and during the talk, you guys can chat and chat and chat. It's up to you guys. You guys can chit-chat and say, oh, I like that point. I know some people who are like, people who are going to church, they're like, amen, hallelujah, right? People, you can write anything that you want. You can talk during it, just kind of get it going, because I know a lot of people sometimes maybe miss points or something. You say, oh, I like that point, or whatever it is, okay? So that means today we're going to go into our wonderful talk. Taco Tuesday today is the story of John, and the title today is called Beloved One. Very cool title, isn't it? Okay, so, all right, get your drinks ready. We're going to start today's Taco Tuesday. So, today we're talking about the story of John, not John the Baptist, not to get confused with John the Baptist. We're going to talk about the Apostle John. Now, the Apostle John had many nicknames. A couple of them I want to tell you. The first one is probably the coolest one. It is Bonerges, right? And Bonerges, like, what does that mean? And it means sons of thunder. It means that if thunder and thunder were married and they came together, they would make John, the sons of thunder. It wouldn't be Thor or Loki. It is John and James, the sons of thunder. Coolest names ever, right? So they're the sons of thunder, and they say most likely they're called the sons of thunder is because they had what you'd call very passionate and fiery character. All right? Now, the second nickname that we're going to talk about here is a name, it's today's title. It is Beloved One, right? The one that Jesus loved, okay? And this is the funny thing about this is, John references it to himself, okay? So it's not like someone said, oh, look at the one that Jesus loves. He basically calls himself that. It's only in his book, in the Gospel of John. So he calls himself the one loved by Jesus. And we're going to go over some parts of his story to show you why he is the one that is loved, okay? Loved by the Lord, okay? So let's get into the story of the Apostle John. Now, first thing you need to know is this: he was actually one of the first apostles that was called by Jesus. He wasn't the first, that was Andrew, but he was right after with Peter and James, okay? So he's one of the original people that were chosen. Now, when he was growing up, like many people today, he went fishing as a child. However, the fishing was not just a hobby. The fishing was actually his life. His father was a fisherman, and a successful fisherman at that. Number one is he owned his own boat, and number two, he even had hired servants. So that means that John, he was living pretty well. It was him with his brother James, and then the two brothers of Andrew and Peter, which are two other apostles of Jesus, okay? Second thing is this, you need to know is, John was one of the closest companions to Jesus. Can you imagine that? It's like, who's your best friend? God? Weird, right? But he was one of the closest friends of Jesus. Now, one of the things that made him so close, and what made people understand that he was so close to Jesus more than anyone else, is because he was able to see things that even the other apostles couldn't see. Let me give you an example. There's one time, there's a guy named Jairus. He's a ruler of the synagogue. And he says, Jesus, my daughter has died. Come save her. Jesus would only take in Peter, James, and John. John was one of those three. And only they were allowed into the room when Jesus resurrected the girl. A second time is a transfiguration. Once again, John was only one of three that was able to see Jesus all of a sudden shine like the sun. And then all of a sudden he sees Elijah and Moses. And the third one, which is probably the most intimate moment, was in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus left the other apostles behind, but took John as one of the three to go even further into the garden, and he saw him pray tears of blood. Now, here's interesting, though. The interesting thing about this is, he is the one that is the most beloved, the one that Jesus loved. But the interesting thing is, he was rebuked many times by the Lord too. And he wasn't just rebuked, you're talking in front of everyone else. And it's actually recorded in the Bible, right? Can you imagine that in the Bible, the record is you got rebuked? Can you imagine that? I'm not sure who's there. Who came early? Fatima. Can you imagine if the new Bible says, and the Lord rebuked Fatima in front of everyone? Like, honestly, that's crazy. But there were three of many times he was rebuked, okay? Number one was, there was this dude out there casting out demons in Jesus' name, and he's like, oh, how dare you? You don't even know the Lord. And Jesus is like, dude, what's wrong with you, right? He's doing a good thing. So he was rebuked in that first time. Second time, Jesus and John and some of the disciples went over to Samaria, but the city rejected Jesus. And you know what John said? Hey, Jesus, should we pray? Should we call to send fire from heaven to destroy this city? And Jesus is like, are you crazy? And he rebukes him again, right? And then the last one, this is the craziest one. I told you the most intimate moment was in the Garden of Gethsemane. This dude, John, one of the closest, he brings him closer, and he falls asleep, not once, but twice, right? And he's like, oh no, like Jesus, he's like, the first time he's like, dude, don't sleep now, come on, man. Like, I'm really struggling right now. He's like, okay, I'll pray. Right? He falls asleep again. Jesus walks back, he's like, right? And then he goes back and prays, and he comes back and he's like, are you still sleeping? That was just one of the biggest rebukes that he ever, and it's in the Bible, that in Jesus' desperate moment, this close friend of him, John, was falling asleep. Now, above all these other things, right, he was also someone that outlived all the other apostles. And interesting thing is, like, number one is, he not only outlived the apostles, he also became the pastor of the church in Ephesus. He pastored the Ephesus church, right? He was a pastor. On top of it, he wrote 5 books in the Bible. And on top of that, he was the only one of the 12 disciples to die a natural death. It wasn't one of those martyr deaths, like, hey, for Jesus, and then, right? It was just like this, for Jesus, and then he dies, right? Natural death. But one thing that makes him very, very close to Jesus, and you know that he was someone that was very close to Jesus, if you look in John chapter 19, verse 26, 27, before Jesus died on the cross, you know what he said to John? He says, he goes to his mom and he says, woman, here is your son. And then to John, Apostle John, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple took her into, he basically put him into brotherhood, like, you're my brother. How so? Well, he says, take care of my mom. This is your son. This is your mom now. Basically, Jesus says, come into my family. And he became the closest. Who would you trust? You trust the closest one, the one you trust the most, with your own mom. And that's how close John was. And he was the beloved one, the one that Jesus loved the most. So it wasn't something that he just said with his lips or wrote in the Bible in the Gospel of John. It was actually something that was real, right? That even Jesus trusted him with his own mother and said, this is now your mother. And mom, that's your new son. That's how close they were. So we got to get into the question of, so what kind of lessons can we learn from this? Right? We got to learn something from this. And it's a really moving story. It's a touching story. He gets rebuked a lot here and there. But the first point I want to give to you is this. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. And this is a very, very important thing. Right? One of the things about people is we kind of feel this way, and we're so scared to make mistakes in front of people or people that we really like, because we're like, we have this fear of failure, the fear of rejection, right? And if we make a mistake, we're like, oh no, they're not going to accept me anymore, right? And often we stop hanging around people just so we don't make mistakes, so we won't get rejected. So we reject ourselves first and say, well, I'm not going to hang out with them anymore. Well, basically, you rejected yourself, right? It's because people have this idea in their hearts that in order for them to be loved, they need to be perfect. Now, John was someone that Jesus loved. He was the beloved one. But if you look at like all the things in the Bible, not only was you see all these things about him being loved, a second thing you see all the time is he's constantly rebuked. Right? He's rebuked all the time. It is written in the books, and it's been read for the last 2,000 years. As crazy as that is, 2,000 years, people are reading all the rebukes that the Lord did to him. Jesus was the one loved by God, but he was also rebuked many times. He made many mistakes, but he was loved. And this brings us to one of the big verses I want to bring today is Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17. And this says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Right? What we have to realize here is, it's not about the perfection. Right? It's not about the perfection. It's about the availability. It's about being there. Right? This is the thing that makes friends friends. That it says what? A friend is born in for adversity. Like in the most difficult times, you're there. That's like the most important part. The part that, that people cry about the most is, people who have fathers that left their house or mothers that left. They're all upset because they left. It wasn't because they were, like, oh my gosh, you said this. Oh, it's better for them to leave than for them to make mistakes on me. No, it was they left. The reason why we look at these friends closely and the reason why we love these people close to us is because they were always there. Yes, there were mistakes made. Many mistakes, like falling asleep in the dark time, saying the wrong things, doing the wrong things. There was a lot of different things, misunderstandings. And if we see with our friends too, there's a lot of that going on. And you'll realize it's not about the perfection. It's about, one of these points I want to put out there is you need to be there, right? You need to be there in order to, that's one of the biggest parts about being a friend is there in all times, right? So my first point I want to give to you, just like John is, even though he's rebuked, like honestly, how many of us would be like, imagine being rebuked by God. And then people would never come back, like, oh, God rebuked me. But it doesn't mean he wants you to leave. You get rebuked because you made a mistake. And you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. And you move forward, right? Second point I want to give to you is fighting for love. Now, I'm not saying fighting for love. I'm saying you're fighting because of love. You're fighting for love, right? One of the things about love is what? Is love is super sensitive. Like love is a very, very sensitive thing. And this is why we get hurt by the people we're closest to. Because the closer you get, the more sensitive you get, the more frustrated you get, the more hurt you get, the more angry you get, right? And we tend to rebuke and complain about those that we hang around the most. If you look in Psalm chapter 55, verse 12, David's like, he's not complaining, but he says, if an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it because it's an enemy. What do I care? If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. If it was an enemy, if it was a foe. But what if it's someone close to you? You can't hide. You can't run away. And it hurts more than anything else. That even if your friend wasn't next to you, if you heard, haven't you guys ever had it when you had a good friend and you heard them like saying bad things about you? That even though they're not there, you feel it. Love is sensitive. People are fighting because of love, right? Because it's so sensitive, the smallest things hurt. Right? Words hurt. Facial expressions hurt. Body language hurts when it comes to the people that are closest to you. Why? Because when you start to love someone, you're letting them into your heart, which means that they are privy to all the good things of love, but then they're also privy to hurting you more severely. People are fighting for love, right? And we have to realize we're hurt by the people closest to us. Right? We are. It's just the way it is. That's what love is. So we have to understand that part about love. Third, and the last thing I want to talk about today is what? Is you don't have to be a martyr. Now, what does that mean? You don't have to be a martyr. See, John was the one that was most loved. But he's the one that didn't even die for Jesus. Like, he just lived his life. And he died naturally at an old age, right? And here's something that's very interesting. Because he died naturally, does that mean he's like worse than the other apostles that died as martyrs? Does that make him worse? No, it doesn't, right? Like, do you need to have like this sad story, but it becomes so like inspirational? It's like, oh yeah, I used to be a prostitute, and then I took drugs, and then I almost died from a drug overdose, and then I came to Christ. And then everyone's like, oh, and when we hear these stories, we're like, oh, it's so happy. The greatest story I've ever heard. We're so inspired and moved, and we're like, wow, how come I don't have a story like that? And the answer is, you don't have to have a story like that, please. Please, you don't have to have that type of story, right? You don't need to be a martyr to be loved. You don't need to be a martyr to be like, to say that you have this great testimony. You don't need a sad story. You don't need to be, oh, my story's not that good. Why? Because it's not moving and inspiring. Because if I don't have that story, does that mean my life is not inspiring? No. It means you lived a good life, which is even better. If we look at Romans chapter 2, verse 9, you know what it says? It says, there will be trouble and distress for every human being who does evil. Which means when we do bad things, we're going to suffer because of that. Are you saying that we have to suffer? I don't have a story. Why? Because I'm too good. I'm way too good. I didn't suffer enough, so my story sucks. No! Because you lived a good life, that is inspiring in itself. It's better not to suffer. Think about this, guys. If you really, 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 really loved your child, do you want them to suffer? Do you want people you love to suffer? Is that the point? And the answer is no. You would rather your child not suffer, but learn and live a good life, right? People are too caught up in this martyr thinking, like, I have to live this life where it's so hard. You don't. You know what's inspiring? It's inspiring if someone lives a good life. That's inspiring, where they never went through those heavy losses. That's inspiring, just as inspiring that they never lost their love for God, right? Think about this too. Do you think it's a great marriage because they cheated on them 4 times, but they overcame? So it's a great marriage because they overcame the 4 times they cheated on them? That's a crazy story. Wouldn't you rather have a love story of a husband and wife were always together, loving each other every day? They never cheated. They were so good to each other. We're like, wow, what an amazing marriage. You don't need to be a martyr, guys, right? You don't need to be a martyr. It's okay to be good, right? Don't think that your testimony or your story or whatever it is going to be too much. You don't need those stories. And it doesn't mean that your story is greater or better. The reason why it sounds so powerful is because you're covering such a huge gap. So let's say I make mistakes, little mistakes. It's not like this great heroic thing. But if I drop all the way to here and then I come back, that is a great feat because you went, but what'd you do? You actually went down first. It was your fault in the beginning, right? So what we have to do is, you have to understand, we don't have to be martyrs. Great lives are the one, just as inspiring as someone who lives like John, right? He made some mistakes here and there, but he was steady, slow. He didn't live the martyr's life, right? He had enough time to write 5 books. He wrote the most books out of any of the apostles. He wrote the most books. He lived the longest. He became a pastor. He pastored a church. And John was great. And everyone looks at John as one of the pillars of Christianity. So I hope that all of us too will realize this from today's story about John, that a lot of us here, number one is, you don't need to be perfect to be loved. Even the people we love today, they were not perfect to us, but we love them still. Why? They were always there. Number 2, people are fighting. Why? Because of love. Love is sensitive, right? It is a sensitive thing because it's someone closer to you, right? And that's why you see them more, and that's why you'll get mad at them more. If you see someone once a week, you're not going to get as mad when you see someone every day. It's just normal. It's a natural thing. And number 3 is, you don't have to be a martyr. You don't have to have this great story or think that your story's not that good. No, I would say it's even better. It's even better that you can live the life good, clean from the very beginning, all right? So I hope that everyone really understood today's story, the story of John, that we were really able to have a good time together thinking about, wow, what about me? Am I thinking this way too? All right? And that will bring us into the end of today's Taco Tuesday, but it'll bring us to time to question and answer. So those of you who are here for the very first time, follow us on Espresso with Sky YouTube for more videos. Subscribe and click the notification bell. Just smash those two buttons. Why? We're like at 965 subscribers. We're only 35 away from 1,000. Super happy about this. So those of you, get your friends and family, someone else to click them in. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, just click subscribe and click the notification bell. Secondly, if you'd like to support this ministry, go ahead and click the link for Patreon. And last but not least, every Saturday, 1 p.m., we have group Bible lessons, so you can fill in the sign-up form, and we'll email you the Zoom link. All right. So I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds, and then we're going to go into the question and answer. All right, so let's go into today's question and answer. First question is from Jean, all the way in Tokyo, Japan. It says, my friend seems to hurt me the most and most often, and how do I deal with this? Okay, so remember, my second point was we're fighting for love, or because of love is why we get hurt the most. And there's two reasons why you are hurt the most and most often by your close friends is because you're with them the most. There's more chances to be hurt, right? It's almost like even this. If you're, they say even if you have a broken clock, a broken clock is always right at least 2 times a day, right? It'll always be right minimum 2 times a day. In the same way too, if you're constantly with someone, you're constantly going to be going through those things. Right? And you're going to be hurt the most and most often because you're with each other so much. Now, does that mean you should stop hanging out with them? And the answer is no, Gene. It's not about stopping, don't hang out with them anymore. What does this mean? It means that you need to start dealing with the relationship itself. Right? You need to sit down and talk. You have to hash things out. One of the biggest reasons why people's relationships keep getting worse and worse is because of a lack of communication. Now, what does that mean? I know some people can talk every day for 2-3 hours, but you need to talk about the right things. If you're hurt by something, you should talk about it. And if you're really close friends, you should be comfortable with it. Isn't it weird? This is the weird thing. You get scared to talk to your friend about it, but when they talk to you about it, you're like, oh man, of course you can talk to me about this. We're friends, come on. So even you're cool about it, but all of a sudden you're like, oh, should I talk to them about this? Oh, maybe they're gonna get hurt by it. No, don't worry about it, right? If you guys are friends too, bring it up, talk about it. It's something that a lot of us just have to learn how to communicate better. Now, I told this before to 3 people before, is when you're really hurt with people, there's 3 things that really matter that you should communicate clearly to people, right? Number 1 is you should talk about the exact thing that they did. Don't generalize it like, man, you're always like this. It doesn't work. You have to be very clear with the exact situation that happened so they know exactly what's happening. Second thing is you have to tell them how it made you feel. This second piece of information is very, very important. And the third one, which is what is the consequence? If you keep doing this, it's going to be hard for me to keep hanging out with you. Right? Those are the 3 pieces of information that are that should be very clear when you speak to someone. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And we all have to get better and better at it more and more. But Gene, if you can work on these, be able to communicate these 3 things clearly, it'll help you out a lot. All right, thanks, Gene, all the way in Tokyo. Let's go next question. We're going to Lynn in KL. And she says, how can I stop myself from wanting to feel perfect in front of people? I want to get closer to my friends, but I still have that fear. And this is something that we could talk about in another lecture too, is how do we stop yourself from wanting to feel perfect in front of people, right? And, one of the biggest problems that we have is expectation. And this is what has to change. It's a perception thing, is do I have to be perfect for someone to like me? And the answer is obviously no. Why? Because I think no one really thinks they're perfect, right? No one knows they're perfect. The only people who are perfect are those on Instagram when they only show the perfect moments, right? So that's kind of a big problem that we have, is this image that we have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. And we're not going to be perfect. And we're going to be imperfect to each other. But what makes us friends is is that even though we're imperfect to each other, we work it out together and we get closer and we bond closer and closer to it. So that's something I think we should do on another talk. It's a really important thing, is how do I stop myself from wanting to feel perfect? But a lot of it has to do with your mind. And this is where the biggest education that has to come into our hearts is changing how the mind thinks, okay? So we'll definitely go into that in a new one. All right, let's go to the next question. All the way over there in Mongolia, Altan Bagana. This is right? That's one name, because it's the same as last name, Altan Bagana from Mongolia. Welcome those of you from Mongolia. How to be courageous against parents. Okay, this is a great question. How do I be courageous to our parents? And this is a little bit different depending on your culture too. Because for instance, I am more westernized, right? So in the Western countries, we are taught to not argue, but to, what's that word? Not dispute. To discuss. Discussion is a huge thing in America. And it gets to the point it's fighting, but still, it's this discussion. And it's something that is really weird for me, because I'm like Asian. My parents are super Asian, and then all my friends are like super like Western, right? And my dad is like the strong, silent Asian dad that doesn't like to say much. But it is something that we have to learn how to do it. But what I'm gonna say to you, Altan Bagana, how do I be courageous to my parents? Is you have to remember why your parents are saying things to you, and you have to remember why you're saying things to your parents. And ultimately, your parents get upset, your parents say crazy things, your parents get mad, your parents get frustrated, whatever it is by you. Why? Because like we said, in today's second point is they're fighting for love. Love is very sensitive. Because they love you so much, everything you do is so big to them. Right? But you have to understand that in the end, it's about love. Like even for myself, with me and my parents weren't too happy that I was gonna become a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. They knew how difficult the life was. And they're like, how are you gonna eat? How are you gonna make money? And here I am, like in this passionate speech, like, it's not about money. It's about my love for God. I'd be having this passionate speech, but for them, they're worried about how you're going to suffer a lot. You're going to go through a lot of difficult times being a pastor, this, and this, right? And they're like, and in their hearts, they're bringing all these things up, not to come against me. It's because they really love me, right? And the one thing that you should be very, very good at is you want, like for instance, for myself, my parents think I was too crazy about church at one point, but now they're okay. Why? Because it's been 20 years. For myself, my parents thought I was crazy waking up every day, like at 4 a.m., to do my prayers and everything else. They thought I was crazy in the beginning. But after like 5-6 years, they're like, you still doing prayer at that time? Like, yes. They're like, oh. Why? Because they've seen us as we've grown up, where we get excited and crazy about something, and a couple months later, we don't do it anymore. It's just a fad, So even for myself, a lot of things that I don't need to say to them, I prove it with what I do. And now it's been like 20 years plus of me waking up at that time. They don't say anything about it anymore. They know I'm really serious about it. But if you're gonna talk to your parents, number one is understand their hearts. They're not coming at you because they hate you. They do everything because they love you. And remember, Jesus rebuked John so many times, but there was still love, right? Second thing is, don't let it ever get emotional. Like, Mom, why do you keep saying this to me? No, be very calm and be very clear. Mom, this is why I am doing this. And you have to be very clear. A lot of times when people talk to their parents, they are not prepared at all. They're like, well, why don't you just let me do what I want to do? That's a very emotional response. We have to be very clear with our parents, because when they see that, they will see maturity and they'll say, he's growing up. She's growing up more, right? Be very clear, be very thoughtful, have your reasons ready, right? And don't get emotional, because once it gets emotional, at that point, it's no longer a conversation. It becomes an argument, right? So I keep everything calm. Be sure you know exactly what you're going to say and the reasons why you're doing something or reason why you want to say something. And also know that your parents come at you not because they hate you. They're doing it really because they love you. And they don't want to see you suffer and go through anything like that. Okay? Altan Bagana, great question. Thank you so much from Mongolia. Let's go to the next question. All the way from the Philippines, it is Alyssa. And Alyssa says, any tips on how to renew the mindset to not fear rejection? How to renew the mindset? Well, number one is you have to reinforce the mind first, which means that you need to keep telling yourself. And this is scientifically proven. Keep telling yourself, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay for them to say no. It's okay, right? Because honestly, one thing that if people get too afraid, like people get like afraid, or they get like, for instance, when someone asks your opinion, it's just an opinion. So even if they say no, oh, okay, well, yeah, maybe not. It's only an opinion. It's not a big deal. It really isn't, because it's just an opinion, right? So even if someone says to you, you say to them, like a lot of the differences that we see is the reason if we get too sensitive to like rejection and this fear, like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe they said no. No is a normal thing that happens in life, right? And you need to reinforce your mind constantly. It's okay. If they say no, so what? If I feel a little bit hurt, it's okay. It's okay. And you have to reinforce the mind first. And what I'm going to tell you is you need to get a lot of experiences of no's. Like for myself, when I went out to go, whenever I don't like go out on the streets to meet people and talk about God, like if I haven't done it for a long time, I get scared from the beginning. Like, oh no, they're going to say no to me. Oh, I'm so scared. But then once you start going, you get your first 20 no's. And then after that's not a big deal, right? Like you need to get the experience in it, because later on you'll realize it's not a big deal. Right? And once you get those first 3, 4, 5 no's through, it's not a big deal. And so that's why one of the things is you gotta experience it more and more. The more experience you have, the better you get at it, right? So Alyssa, I definitely think, not fearing rejection is, I would start with the things that are very, very small, right? And you always have to bring things into perspective. Yeah, like some of the things that people say no to us is not really that big. It's like, hey, what do you want to eat? Oh, how about sushi? No, I don't feel like it. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Some of the things don't really matter, right? So you start with the small things, but reinforce your mind constantly first. Reinforce your mind. It's not a big deal. It isn't, right? Sometimes it feels like it, but just reinforce your mind. Hey, come on, it's not that bad. Really? Like, has the world ended? Has my life really changed? And the answer is no. Okay, so let's go to the last question today. Last question is Rena in the Philippines. Oh, same question? How to overcome fear of rejection. Okay, so I kind of answered the same thing. How to overcome fear of rejection. I hope that what I was talking about with Alyssa kind of helps you out too. But no matter what, I'm going to tell this for Alyssa, Rena, for everyone else too, is in order for us to overcome anything in life, number one is, as long as you don't do anything about it, like it's really up to you. Like it's you. Sometimes you need a friend to hold your hand to do it, right? But you have to ask your friend to hold your hand and do it. Like all the best advice, even if God came down and told you to do it this way, the only person that can make you do it is you, right? And that's why it has to start with maybe Alyssa and Rena together. Hold hands. Like, how do we not fear this? Let's just do it together. Sometimes you need someone to do it with you. And then as you get used to it more and more, then you're able to do it on your own. But you have to reinforce your mind constantly over and over again that it's okay, it's fine. Okay? Thank you so much for those awesome and wonderful questions over there. Very, very thankful and grateful for all of you guys joining us here on Taco Tuesday. It is the 11th one today. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. We'll see you guys at Bubble Talk on Thursday, or we'll see you Saturday for the Bible study, or we'll see you next Tuesday for the Taco Tuesday. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we'll see you guys again. Bye-bye.
We believe in the same God, but we are on different levels.
Put your hands in the sky if you feel alive. All the stories that we made, just you and I. Never losing all the passion. All this love is my obsession. Oh my gosh, this feeling got me heat stroke. His love like a billion pots about to heat though.